Good morning and welcome to Parents Canada Talk Radio here on News Talk 960, Saga 960. Got to remember the city or town I'm in. I'm Jason Thompson, and my co-host is missing, actually. She is having the most wonderful moment, which is the parenting moment. The moment that we all fear so much. And that moment is traffic. If you live in the Toronto area, you already know that the city is impenetrable when it comes to traffic. And of course, there's construction everywhere. So she will be joining us in just a couple of minutes. Today, we're going to talk about the idea of magical childhoods. But before that, let's talk about what's happening in summer. You know, it's that dip in summer. Yesterday, I heard for the very first time, I heard that moment. You know that moment? The back to school commercial. The very, very first one. And that tells you that you're probably in the hottest week of the entire summer. One. And two, you're going to be hearing from your kids in just the next couple of days that, oh my goodness, school's coming, I don't know what to do, and all of that sort of great stuff. Really, it's, getting them ready for bedtimes and lunches and things like that. Now, my personal week in parenting has been interesting. I was speaking in Columbus, Ohio last week at the University of Ohio State, and I got a great opportunity, which was the chance to take my 18-year-old son with me. If you're playing along with Parents Canada Talk Radio Bingo, this is the part where I always mention that my son is off to university in a few weeks because it's weighing on my mind a fair bit. And I feel like I'm trying to jam 18 years of parenting into really just about 6 weeks. Can I teach him to cook? Is he going to get his driver's license? Is he going to be ready? Does he have his OSAP in line? All that fun and great and good stuff. But, the journey was really, really neat for me. What I love about road trips, because I do this a lot with my kids, 2 hours, 4 hours, 10 hours sort of things. We've gone to Chicago in the past and Nashville and things like that, is those moments in the car. I wrote for Parents Canada a few years ago about how I do a lot of my parenting in the car. As a parent, you're spending all of your time in the car as well, right? So this is the opportunity when you can talk to your kids about their emotional intelligence. You can talk to your kids about, what's going on in their world. And for my son, for my 18-year-old, this trip to Cincinnati and Columbus was great. It's 8 to 10 hours of driving. In that 8 to 10 hours of driving, we learn a whole bunch about each other. In fact, I learned two specific things in between our stop at the Ohio State Fair, where we tried crazy food like a dill pickle popsicle, and our trip to the Cincinnati Reds game on Friday night, which was fantastic. These were the two things I learned. The first thing that I learned is my son actually, who's fairly stoic, he almost has kind of an opposite feeling of who I am. He's fairly stoic, and he told me he really, really loves these journeys. The part he loves most isn't the baseball game and the dill pickle popsicle, although I did watch him eat some crazy food at the state fair. Is what he really likes is the drive. And the drive includes, playing DJ for Spotify and listening to podcasts. We listened to about 10 episodes of No Such Thing as a Fish, which is a highly recommended thing for all families to listen to. There's some not safe for language here, not safe for work language here and there, but by and large, it's a really great way to learn about facts and things like that. So that was the first thing I learned. He really loves that part, the actual driving. The second thing that he really, really loves is talking about physics. And I got probably a first-year university course in physics on the way down. He spent 2.5 hours. This is a kid who doesn't talk a lot, and I don't think he breathed for all of the stuff that he was avalanching me with. It was a pretty incredible thing, a pretty magical experience, which... Hi, Lisa.
Hello.
Welcome.
I am here. I made it.
I said, you were experiencing the most parental of all things, which is traffic, right? Are we going to make it to school on time? Or are we going to get to the... Yeah, that's sort of... So welcome.
Yeah. I have to say that me being that few minutes late, I was able to listen to our show live for the first time. And so I did hear your intro, so thanks for
How was that?
Covering. Summer traffic, it was one lane on a major road, and it just took a really long time. So I apologize I'm late.
It is Toronto, by the way. Like, I don't want to get into a whole thing about traffic, but I do a lot of driving around, kind of eastern part of North America. And outside of maybe New York City, not even Chicago is this bad. It's really, really, it makes it tough to be a parent to be able to get places on time because Waze, you're using the GPS with Waze, and Waze just finally just says to you, you know what? I don't know. I give up. You'll get there when you get there.
Yeah. Well, that was part of my problem was I thought I was smarter than Waze today. And so I went down a road that was one lane, and I was like, oh, that's why they wanted me on that road. But it's also just my husband, who may be listening, is probably laughing because he says I'm notoriously late for everything. So that this is the first time is pretty amazing.
This is an age-old husband and wife thing. There's always one. My kids. I told them to call me this, as opposed to them coming up with this on their own. I'm Mr. On Time, right? So that's the structure that I make. But my partners in the past may not have been on time in the same way, and I'll bet you in 4 seconds my watch is going to beep with somebody texting me saying, "How dare you say that about me?" So we're talking about it's the middle of the summer, and I just mentioned kind of my road trip. What's going on in your summer? What challenges are you facing? What excitement are you facing? What things are happening?
Challenges I'm facing. One of the things so we are talking today about magical thinking, and when I was preparing for the show, I was like, I kind of got this stuff. Like, this is the stuff that I do. Where I struggle is with all the emotional stuff that comes with raising two kids who live in, community with friends and all of that. And so that has been our challenge, is all the emotional. My friend didn't talk to me today, or she didn't want to sit with me on the bus to camp, so it's been all of that kind of stuff that I've been really, really challenged with.
How do you deal with this? Because I had something like this, so I'd love to hear your perspective.
I really don't think I deal with it well. I do a lot of talking, and one of the things I'm noticing is that I just want to fix it. And so I kind of start telling her, this is what you need to say next time. And that's not working. So
it's interesting you bring that up, because, I spend a lot of my time learning about, listening about, how we make decisions and emotional intelligence. It's a weird hobby, I get it, but it's a good one. And I recently listened to a podcast where they tackle this exact thing, which is, what do you do in a moment when things go wrong? And my 8-year-old last year, I remember her getting off the bus and saying, some kids made fun of me this morning, and what I said to her, what I thought was good. Not that good that they made fun of you, but this is an opportunity for us to understand how to deal with this. And the first thing that I do, and the thing that I'm hopeful I was validated by the podcast, is to deal with the emotional side, which is allow them to feel, right? Like the idea of, and so what they talk about in the podcast is this idea of allow the child or yourself to be emotionally literate. What are the feelings I have right now? Right, I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm excited, whatever that is, right? And then, and this was the thing that blew me away, and this might be helpful to you, might not be helpful to you, is this: an emotion lasts for a maximum of 90 seconds. That's it. That is the longest amount of time that an emotion typically happens. And I'm sure you're sitting there going, yeah, but I felt crummy for a while. So here's what happens. What happens is an emotion will flow through you in 90 seconds. Then you have a decision to make. Are you going to invest in that emotion and then blow it up to where it becomes a mood? So it becomes longer. You're extending the emotion. Or are you going to be reverent to the emotion, saying, you know what? This person didn't talk to me on the bus. I feel terrible about that. I feel upset about that. I feel mad about that. And then there are pieces that you can go forward. But the point that he's making is the data shows that the emotion part actually goes quick. So he talked about the fact that his brother had passed away just 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he says, obviously I think about it. I start, they start to well up. He says the water comes out of the eyes, right, sort of thing. But he said, after a certain amount of time, what I say to myself after that initial blush is I say to myself, I feel sad right now. And then he takes the next steps. There's a whole school of thought about naming the emotion is actually partially a powerful thing for you to be able to actually then deal with the emotion, to actually understand what you're targeting in the first place. So I'm throwing a bunch at you in real time here. We haven't even started, but there's something interesting in there.
There is. I just think my daughter chooses that emotion for hours.
Well, so then what happens is the emotion becomes the mood, right? That's the point that they're making, right? Is that she chooses at one point going, and we see this, right? Like we see it in ourselves as adults, is, we feel somebody else is at work, right? And we feel a whole bunch of things at the same time, but then we double down and start investing in that emotion, and then it becomes our world, right? And again, I don't have all of the answers, but I find that there's a fascinating conversation to be had here. Now, as parents, like you said right off the top, right, is you want to fix this. And that really does speak to our topic today, which is, are we making childhood too magical? So what does that mean?
Well, I have to say that I did not think of this at all before the show. I think that's one of the great things about being on the show with you is that, we're sent stuff over from our editor and she said, this is what the topic's going to be. And you start reading and you're like, oh, what is this? This is totally new to me. So I didn't think about this at all. And so when I was reading more about it, this whole magical world that we're trying to create for kids, it could be small things like everyday adventures. You were talking about, creating an adventure on the drive with your son. It could be that. It could be adventures in the park. It could be adventures at home. But then it goes even further when you start thinking about over-the-top birthdays, Elf on the Shelf at Christmas time, and Easter Bunny, and whatever holidays and traditions you follow. I have to say, as I was reading this, I was like, check, 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 check. I do all of these. And I do go to the extreme. Like birthday parties are huge for us, and I always try to make them more special than the previous year.
Why? Why is that?
I love birthday parties and I love birthdays, and it's a day to celebrate that you are alive. And so I just want them to have that memory. I want them to remember that they woke up that morning and there were balloons in their room, or that I've redecorated their room to be all unicorns, or whatever it may be. It's all about that memory. And I that's the role that I've given myself, as memory maker. And so, so I was like, I do all these things. And then it started talking about the risks. And I was like, oh.
So let's talk about it. Because, when we first start talking about what the show is, and I think the initial title was around, are we killing kids' imagination or creativity? And, I'm on the subway heading downtown. I'm like, of course we're not. The kids are great, resilient, but there are some risks. And so what did you uncover in your research?
Well, I actually want to investigate that a little further with our guest, who's Dr. Andrea Breen. She's from the University of Guelph, and she's done a lot of studies around this. And so I'm interested to hear her perspectives. But the thing that I took away was not the risks to children, and I know that sounds horrible as the parent, but more the risk to, or the impact to the parent themselves. Because I have been on that receiving end where you feel resentful, you feel anxious and stressed. Like trying to get Christmas perfect is very stressful for me. And trying to top myself on birthdays, that can become stressful at times. So I see that piece of it.
I got to be honest with you. The more time I spend on this show, the more I think that the subtext of what really is going on is, it's not about the parenting part so much as like the impact it has on kids. Certainly, there are things from a behavioral perspective, that we need to focus on and around food and, kind of instructing our kids as they grow up. But it's that other side that you just described, that idea that, it feels, I hate saying it feels like, but in the research that I've done, that it's parents that are getting the brunt in this generation, in this perspective on parenting. We're hyper aware, we're hyper anxious, we're hyper competitive, we're hyper judgmental. And I'm not trying to like break down every single person every single moment, but the idea is that is truly something that we have to face. If you're constantly putting together a great road trip, literally yesterday I'm on Airbnb looking at spaces in different cities to take the kids on the annual road trip at the end of the summer, and I'm trying to think, is it really worth spending the extra $500,000, $2,000 for the week away? Because it has a financial impact, and so it's creating a level of excitement, but also a level of anxiety for me. And so I think this idea of like being reverent to us as parents, you almost want to give every listener a hug to say, you know what? It's okay. You're doing your best, and here's some stuff we can give you to help you understand how to move forward. Yeah, so I just I feel that anxiety, it's on the parent side. And I'd also like to, because I did put, a poll out on Instagram yesterday asking if other people felt the same. They felt this pressure. And it was just interesting. One of the findings that I got was that it was like 60% of the people who were replying say that they feel this pressure that they have to create magical moments or create over the top birthday parties or what have you for their kids. And so I'm really looking forward to speaking with Dr. Breen in just a few moments. And we will be doing that right after this break. You are listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on Saga 960. Hello
Hello and welcome back to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960. So we have a guest for you today, and I'm really excited. Welcome, Dr. Andrea Breen.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Andrea, you are an associate professor at the University of Guelph, and you work in the Faculty of Family Relations and Applied Nutrition. And when we spoke yesterday, you were telling me some of the work that you have done and are doing. One of them is all around storytelling and identity and well-being and that connection, which I think is so interesting. And then the other one, which I really want to know more about, but it's just not the show, is the relationship between dogs and kids. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to bring you back in on that one, because that one just sounds like a great one.
Can we just change the show right now?
Right?
We can try to sneak it in.
Yeah. Love that.
We say
so
this,
much.
know that in the control booth 5 feet away from us, there's a little puppy laying on the floor right there. He's super cute.
So great.
Yeah. So we have a few questions for you, but if you, the audience, have any questions for us or Dr. Breen here, please call us at 416-640-0200, or you can hit us on social media, any of the channels of your preference at Parents Canada. So, Andrea, we're talking about this magical thinking, and, we were talking about over-the-top birthday parties and all of that, and just would love to hear a little bit more from you on what are you seeing? What is that we are doing today to our kids that is really like spoon-feeding this magic to them?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I think there's so many sides of it. And I come at it as a professor, and my background is actually in teaching, so I was a classroom teacher, and I'm a developmental psychologist, but I'm also a mom. I have 2 kids. They're 9 and 11. So when we talk about spoon-feeding magic, I think magic is really important and has such an important place in kids' development and also in our relationships and how we connect to each other, throughout kids' lives. Even when they're grown-ups, it can have a place. But the sort of pressure to create magic also can make for really tired parents and contribute to family stress. So finding ways to do it in a way that supports everybody's well-being and healthy development, that's the important part.
Mm-hmm. This is interesting. Like as soon as you said that, I immediately thought of the stereotypical Thanksgiving dinner, where you're trying to put everybody together, differing opinions, differing insights and things like that, but there's always a war, but you're trying to make it this idyllic American Gothic approach to things. I'm curious to know, do you see this idea of, persistently trying to create magical experiences for kids and ourselves? Is this a trend? Like, is this getting worse?
It seems like it is getting worse. I think with every kind of holiday, if you think Easter and Thanksgiving and Christmas and various holidays, at least in Western cultures that we're celebrating, it seems like they get bigger and bigger every year.
And why?
Yeah, I think there is a trend towards that.
So then, of course, the one that goes hand in hand with that is the question is, why is this a problem? Why do you think that, spoon-feeding, creating, igniting magical experiences is a problem for a kid as they grow up into an adult?
I think the problem we have is that we're creating the experiences for kids. And what we know from kids' brain development and looking at well-being over time is that the real magic happens when kids are participating in creating the magic. So one of the things I'm super interested in is research on storytelling. And we know that storytelling is hugely important for kids' development. So they learn language through hearing stories starting in infancy. And sharing stories with family is really important throughout kids' lives. But the key piece of the storytelling that's really important for their development is that they actively participate in creating stories. So we want the kind of storytelling where kids are asking questions and interrupting and helping to shape characters and ideas and setting. That's the kind of storytelling that's really great for their development. And so getting back to the question of the spoon-feeding magic, when we create entire experiences for them that are ready-made and they just walk into them, we're missing an opportunity to really foster their development. And I think we're making ourselves overworked and exhausted in the process.
Do you have an example of, where I guess I'm asking 2 sides of the coin. One is, do you have an example of where the kids aren't getting that chance to co-create? And then do you have an example of where the kids co-creating and storytelling can actually be powerful and useful?
Yeah, so I think in terms of examples of them not, this sort of tooth fairy example can be one where kids walk into that and, the tooth fairy comes and there's a whole magical world that is created perhaps by the tooth fairy for the kids in that. And that's great. It can create really happy memories and kids can, go back to that over time, and not to say there's anything wrong with that. But that kind of experience doesn't, sort of help with things like well-being and even identity formation, the way that things like just sitting around the table at dinner and sharing stories about your day, or, finding objects outside on a walk and creating stories together about where those objects have come from and who they belong to. The kind of stories that we can fit into our everyday are the kinds of stories that really foster health and well-being for kids.
That is great. So I guess, one of the questions that I have, because as I said at the top of the show, I was reading through the materials, and one of the articles was from parentscanada.com where you contributed and you shared your insights, I was literally going, check, I do all these things. So I guess the question is, where do we draw the line? How can we distinguish between, we're going overboard right now, or I'm just really loving this and I'm having fun myself?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the question. So if you're loving it and you're a parent who's totally into these things and you have such a great time with it, then absolutely go for it. But if you find that you feel pressure to go for it or feel like you should be doing it, but actually it's contributing to you being stressed, then it's time, I think, to take a step back and do it in a way that's better for you. Because ultimately, healthy parents who are happy are going to be, the best thing possible for kids. Kids want connection to us more than they want us to be sort of stressed and frazzled and making sure that everything is done according to someone else's idea of how things should be.
That makes me feel a little bit better, because one of the things that we do in my house is we're a big Halloween house. You know that house, right? The house that they've spent far too much time, standing in spirit stores at 50% off sales buying. This is very specific, but it's actually a thing. So people come to depend on things. But last year I was traveling a fair bit in October. I was exhausted. And I thought, you know what? I can't do this year. It'll tip me over, sort of thing. And the kids were great with it. The kids were saying, hey, listen, it's no problem. Let's just bring up a couple decorations. We'll hand out candy. We'll go trick-or-treating. We'll be okay with this. And then, next year, hopefully you're not traveling as much and we can continue. But what that brings up for me is, Lisa, you just said that line between, I guess, family traditions that you create and family traditions that aren't really traditions, that are kind of handed to you. You mentioned earlier, Lisa, the elf on a shelf as an example, like the phenomenon around that, and knowing that that is entirely a fabric. There's an organization, a company that kind of created elf on the shelf. I mean, you could go back and say that even our modern perception of Santa has got the same thing. I mean, Coca-Cola kind of developed that in the 1930s. So where's that line for that, where you can kind of feel this is a good and worthy tradition to create for us versus this is just something that's distracting?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And you know what? When you talk about your Halloween house, I think your neighbors really want you to keep that house going.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that was the number one piece of feedback. Yeah, the feedback we got was people came up to me and go, is everything okay?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, too. One of the things that's so lovely about houses like yours, and we have a few of those in our neighborhood as well, not ours, unfortunately, but others, is that they create traditions for the whole community.
That's great.
And so you do, that sounds like something that has all kinds of magic in it, because it's helping kids to feel connected, to the family, but also beyond the family, to get to know their neighbors and to, sort of strengthen relationships with other kids in the neighborhood. And that's really what we want for our kids. We want them to be connected to us as parents, but really fostering connections with, other family members, close friends, neighbors. So that kind of tradition, actually, I think, yes, absolutely, they can go to other houses for it, and it doesn't need to be you all the time. But those kinds of community building traditions, I think, are great too.
I love that idea. That idea.
Yeah. So I am so not the Halloween. That one's not my thing. You
can come to my house. We'll give a good candy bars.
Well, what I'm feeling good about is that I've kind of said that one's not my thing, but then I will go overboard on Christmas, and so I'm maybe I am picking and choosing where my line is. But what advice, Dr. Breen, would you give to other parents? Are there practical things that they can do to make sure that they're not going overboard? And then there's that whole, that co-creation like you talked about earlier. What can parents do on the daily?
Yeah, I think on the daily, it's checking in with themselves, first of all, in terms of not going overboard. And for all of us, like this will change from year to year and maybe even from week to week. Like there's times in life that are just harder for us, all of us. So as parents, we might not have, the bandwidth to make it really awesome this year. So yes, picking and choosing and putting energies into where it's going to bring you the most joy and the most connection with your kids. And then I think in terms of the story sharing, the great news about that is that's actually in some ways lets us all off the hook. Like one of the things we found about even literacy is that reading is really important with kids, but telling oral stories is also just as important. And starting from infancy all the way through teen years. And so the kinds of stories that they like are stories that are, fictional and making things up together, maybe involving props and creativity. That's great. But on a much lower key level, kids love stories about their grandparents. They love stories about our lives. They love stories about their day-to-day experience, their own experience. So sharing stories, at the dinner table or whenever you can have a meal together is great. Sharing stories in car rides, out on walks. We know that kids who have parents who tell more stories and share more stories have better language development and also have better mental health by the time they hit adolescence. Wow. So just building that into everyday and easy ways. And a story can be 2 minutes long, doesn't have to have a lot of pressure to it, or it can last days and have chapters that continue. So just
that sounds cool.
Bring it into every day.
As a guy who, one of the programs that I run is called How to Tell a Story, which is I teach grown-ups how to do that in a corporate setting. You just gave me 4 things that I can steal, so thank you. I really appreciate
amazing.
that.
I have more. We can talk later.
All right. Well, we got to go to a break, but Dr. Breen, you're gonna hang out with us because we've got some insights and things like that, and we'd like some more insights. If you've got some thoughts on the magical childhood, if you've got some great stories that you'd like to share about the things that you do or that have gone right, gone wrong, that sort of stuff, we want to hear from you. Give us a call at the studio at 416-640-0200 or check in with us on all of our social media platforms. We're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and that's at Parents Canada. Meanwhile, take a couple minutes and breathe. You're listening to Parents Canada Radio, talk radio on News Talk Saga 960. Welcome back, parents, to Parents Canada Talk Radio here on News Talk Saga 960. I'm Jason Thompson. I'm with superstar parent
Lisa Durante.
We need to get you a T-shirt that says it. We need to remind each other, I think, a little bit more. We're doing all right. You know what? It's okay. We're doing great. And we're learning about how okay some of the things that we are doing when it comes to making a magical childhood is. It feels to me like, we're talking right now with Dr. Breen about storytelling and about how you kind of integrate the sense of co-creation, that sort of stuff. It feels very much like instead of taking away from the great traditions we're creating for our kids and our families and that sort of stuff, here's some great tools you can use to add to the story and create and help them get to storytelling. So, they get off the bus and say, hey, how was today? You can say, hey, tell me a little bit about what you did today, sort of thing. And I think that's a really, really great piece of advice.
Yeah, I was scribbling down while you've been talking, Dr. Breen, just to get your little tips, and I can bring them home. But yeah, we did get, so I think we both posted on social, and we pulled in some questions from our audience, and we would love for you to help us answer some of them. And so one of them is around social media itself. So some parents were saying that the pressure that they feel to create these over-the-top birthdays or maybe go, create, when you're thinking of Elf on the Shelf and all the crazy antics they do, it comes from social media and what other people are doing. So they feel like this need to keep up. Do you have any advice to those parents on how they can kind of reel that in a bit?
Yeah, it's social media is so tricky, I think, for all of us. I mean, as parents, we're kind of figuring out social media for ourselves while also trying to raise kids in this world of social media. So it's super complicated. But I think with any kind of media for ourselves or our kids, like thinking about kind of the media diet that we're taking in. So we're, as parents, also influenced by other people's stories.
Yes.
And so it might be sort of putting limits on ourselves as to maybe around the holidays we don't look on social media quite as much. If we're not good at sort of ignoring it and not doing that social comparison. But yeah, it's a really challenging thing, I think, for all of us.
Your point's a really good one. I found personally that about 2 years ago, I really didn't like the feeling I was getting when I was going specifically on Facebook. I don't have personal accounts for Instagram. I do have for my businesses. But I didn't like the feeling I was getting. I could feel occasionally you'd get a bit of jealousy. You know, this person went to Germany, right, with their family. And I'm like, wow, how are they able to afford that? And it's like, why do you care, right? Because, you know, you're having great – your kids are not going to go, remember that year we didn't go to Germany? No. They're going to say, remember that time that we went to Chicago or the hot dogs we ate in Pittsburgh or whatever that is. So that was the first thing is I found the word media diet's really interesting because I think it's not just the social media side of things. It's, you know, what we're reading in terms of news. And I in the past I felt that I was spending far too much time on Reddit. And again, you can feel that anxiety start to creep up. And when I do feel that now, I notice it and I go, you're in the wrong place because this isn't helping you in any way, shape, or form. It's actually harming you, and you're probably going to make bad decisions as a result of it.
Yeah, it really impacts our moods. And I think, you know, as parents, we're really tuned into media and kids, which is great because they also shape their sense of who they are from the stories they interact with, like family stories, but also the stories that they see on TV and even the ones they read. And for us, too, like other people's stories influence our moods. They influence our sense of ourselves. So trying to tune into that in ourselves, I think, is really important. And to be honest, I'm not doing it terribly well either. Like I am having the same sort of struggle on Facebook personally.
Can we just take a second and be reverent to that? Because this is a really important thing that you just brought up, which is, you know, you're a professor, you know, we're professionals at what we do, and we all still struggle. So again, it's that hug again where I want to say to other parents, look I get it on Facebook and social media. You can see the fake book, right? Like all of the great things that are happening in our lives and things like that. But the truth is we all struggle to try. There is no single roadmap that you can have. And that's okay. So I just wanted to be reverent to that and say thank you for that. I think you've given us a moment of permission, if you will.
Oh, good. Yeah, and I think people do post good things on Facebook, right? Like that's a very specific image that we're putting out in the world with our Facebook posts.
Yeah.
Life is not an everyday vacation for anybody.
Wait, what?
It sure looks like it on Instagram. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit, you know, I also put some stuff out there. I have a good friend who co-runs a kid's, I guess, music studio. I'm underselling it. It really is about, you know, kind of theater and all of that sort of stuff. And it's great because the studio was founded on the idea not of let's craft you to become amazing at musical theater. It's let's empower you and create a sense of confidence in that. And I asked the question, you know, are you seeing more of these magical moments? And I got a very, very long series of texts from one person. And what I took away, there's one specific thing I want to take away because this to me feels, when we talk about magical childhood, it's actually a symptom of a larger emblem. And this is what she said. She said, parents don't want their kids to experience struggle, failure, or pain. And that's understandable. But sometimes it's not only important, but necessary in learning. By making kids' lives picture perfect, parents are setting kids up for dissatisfaction and disappointment, lacking skills and creative thinking to conquer problems, and lacking the ability to make their own changes in their own life. And she then goes on to give me a series of examples. You know, she makes kids at the age of 10, 11, 12 audition, and not all of those kids get in. Not necessarily because the performances lack, but they give very specific feedback to help them grow and to say, listen, sometimes there's victory, sometimes there's disappointment. But I love this studio because of the sense of nourishment and empowerment for the kid away from the parents. But she did note in her notes, she says it's getting worse. We're seeing more helicopter lawnmower parents and things like that, trying to overschedule, overstimulate the kids. Any thoughts when you guys hear any of this stuff?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I hear in that is we do want kids who can develop grit is, you know, one of the big buzzwords in education these days. But really what it is when you're faced with a challenge, you get back up again and keep working at overcoming the challenge. Yeah. And so if kids don't have opportunities to struggle a little bit in sort of age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate ways, then that doesn't develop. Yeah. So I think that's great. I think in terms of feedback and auditioning, that's where it will fall on the parents a little bit after they get that kind of feedback. Like how the parents handle that with the kids is really important. Because kids need to be taught how to fail and to be taught that we learn through failure and that failure is sort of a good thing. And so if the parent handles that positively and is on board with that being a really important lesson, then it can be a great learning opportunity.
Which that brings up the example. My 8-year-old last year, she tried out for Shrek. Cast was limited size at the studio. She didn't make it. But what I really liked was they detailed out where things went. So the first thing that we did was we were reverent to the emotional side. Hey, it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel badly about this. And so we kind of worked through kind of the emotional intelligence side of the game, and then we pushed against the grit. We said, okay, so now what can we do about this in the future? So, come the fall, she's now looking at kind of doing another play. So she didn't just fully give up. She thought, okay, I can get better at this, and I'm going to be a year older next year, and here we go.
Well, that whole idea of disappointment, I think that also came through in one of the questions. So I had put out a poll on Instagram yesterday asking parents if they feel pressure to create this magic. And so, as I said at the top, the last time I checked, it was like about 60 or a little bit over 60% said yes, they feel this pressure. And so then I asked why. And one of the things that they said they feel the pressure, social media was a big one. But then the other one was that as their kids get older, they're going to school and they're interacting with other kids, or they're going in, for play dates, and they're seeing things in other houses. So, and I've experienced this where my kid comes home and says, "Oh, I saw, so-and-so has this beautiful tent in the basement." And so what can we say when kids come home and talk about what their friends have or what their friends' parents do for them, and to kind of stop that, keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing?
I think that's such a good question. And I think it's actually not something that we can address just with our kids in one conversation. I think it's kind of a philosophy and attitude shift. Ooh. So one thing with my kids that we talk about and have, sort of varying degrees of success with is the kind of want brain that they get. Like they see something they want or someone else does something that they want, and then they forget all of the fantastic things about their life and they just want that thing. So we call that out and talk about how, brains, this is it's a useful analogy for kids, but it's more complicated. But brains are kind of like muscles where if you practice wanting, you're going to build the want muscle and want more. So teaching kids and ourselves and remembering to kind of practice, recognizing what we have and being aware of what we have and grateful for it. And so there's some great analogies, like we talk about, there's a book, and I'm going to forget who wrote it, but it talks about filling your bucket. And at the end of every day, we have a bucket, and the bucket kind of represents well-being. So with kids, what are the things that fill your bucket, and what do you have that fills your bucket, and what are the relationships that make you have a nice full bucket at the end of the day? And then what are the things that deplete your bucket? And one of the things that I think takes away from all of our buckets is that social comparison and wanting things that other people have.
Yeah.
This is, to me, again, this is fascinating, even on a personal level. I think, I grew up, we were a lower income family, and we didn't have a lot of stuff. So that want muscle developed quite robustly as an adult. And it's, now that I have the flexibility to be able to essentially, you can go out and you see a pair of headphones, you buy the pair of headphones. Well, what I learned over time was I would buy the pair of headphones, and the pursuit of the headphones was exciting to me. It's like I'm comparing models and I'm figuring out which one and where can I get the best price. But there comes a moment you buy the headphones, and I found I'm miserable. And what I learned was that that's not filling my bucket. Yeah. And so I spent the time to really deconstruct what does fill my bucket. And what I learned was it's the act of creation. So when I'm anxious in the morning, when I have deadlines on, copywriting or whatever it is, if I get to work, the anxiety goes away and is actually then replaced with a sense of momentum. So really where I'm going with the story is to say it creates an opportunity to play your kids one-on-one. And that's the thing, right, is that if you kind of try to apply generic strategies, they're not going to work out. But if you look at the individual child and say, this is where they are, this is where the gap is, and this is what I can actually do to help that gap, there can be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I like that kind of self-awareness that takes is something that develops over time, right? So helping kids to be aware of it in themselves and kind of early symptoms where they start to feel the kind of anxiety that goes with wanting, that can be important. But I think it's one of those lessons, like everything difficult in parenting, it's not just one conversation. It's, maybe thousands of conversations over development and trying to teach it as they get older.
And again, it's not like I've bred the concept of want out of me. It's something I struggle with on a fairly regular basis. And if I can do anything to help the kids get get to a better place, that's a good thing.
And I just want to point out too, like that there's good reasons for us wanting things too, right? So sometimes when when life is really unfair, the fact that we want something can alert us to sort of inequity in society and in our own lives and things that we do want to kind of that are real, that we might want to resist. So if kids living in inadequate housing or not having enough food or things like that, like there can be situations where it's absolutely want is signaling something important.
Yeah. That seems like it can go into a whole other conversation for us, but we are at time. And so, Dr. Breen, I just want to say thank you so much. Before we let you go, where can we learn more about you if folks wanted to find more out?
Well, I have a website at the University of Guelph, but I'm actually in the process of building a proper one.
Ooh.
So I'd say for now, it's kind of on hold, but you can Google me at the University of Guelph, and it will get you to a relatively inadequate description, and hopefully I'll have a website soon.
And are you on any social, like Twitter or anything?
I'm on Twitter, but I'm terrible at using it.
Okay, so
good for you.
Yeah, I am there.
Good.
At Prof. Breen, but it's not terribly inspiring.
Okay. Well, like I said, we would love to have you back to talk more about the work you're doing with the relationship between dogs and kids. So you'll be hearing from us at least.
Wonderful. I'll look forward to that. Thanks so much for having me.
Dr.
Thank you. And so you're listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960. And we'll be right back right after this. And we're back. You're listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Saga 960. Why is it that I keep stumbling on that today?
You know why? It's because of the music. Remember all the time we spent kind of thinking about what the musical profile of the show would be?
Yeah.
And it's so like I saw you just bopping.
Yeah,
up and down.
I bop every time.
It's great.
Anytime I hear music that is boppy and happy, I have to move
There you
to
go.
it.
So it's distracting for you.
There you go. Maybe that's it. I'll use that as the excuse. So this has been such a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking to Dr. Breen. She just, there were a lot of things that I was jotting down. I had said before, I was jotting down some things. And just even her insights on the questions that we got through social was great. What do you think you learned today?
There's a lot to take away. I think the biggest thing that you take away is that idea of as parents, we're all human and we're all doing our best sort of thing. That I think that the thing we talked about very early on is why you're doing this. Are you doing it for a good, positive reason, meaning it brings joy to you and it brings joy to the kids, and there's not, you're not overwhelmed by. This doesn't just say that there's never going to be any stress in anything that you do, but that's a good reason to do something. I think that there's definitely that. On the flip side, if you're doing it as a reaction to stuff that you're seeing on social media, or if it's creating great anxiety or creating financial stress and that sort of thing, maybe it might not be such a great thing. But in all of that, she said something that was awesome to me, which was this whole idea about community experiences, which I'd never even considered. I had a friend kind of text me, said, when I look at my kids, what I like to do is I like to create the spark for them and then allow them to run with the ball. And it actually brought up something that happened in my neighborhood a couple of weeks ago, which is my 8-year-old. There's this great company called Antsy Pants that makes these little lemonade stands. I may have mentioned this previously, but she takes out the little fabric covered lemonade stand, puts it on the front lawn, and then suddenly it's a party, right? It's all the kids from all the houses down the street, and then the moms will make the lemonade, but then leave the rest of the concept to the kids. So they have to figure out how they're going to sell it. They're making little flyers that they were passing around the neighborhood. They were they're even divvying up the money at the end, right?
Budding entrepreneurs. That's great.
It's great because it's we didn't create the experience for them. We said, here's a lemonade stand. On the day you feel that it's a valuable thing, go out and do whatever you want to do with it. We'll support you there, make sure that the police aren't going to arrest you, which is a thing that's been happening in the United States, by the way.
Really?
They're arresting, the Country Time Lemonade, this is one of my favorite promotional campaigns of the last year, has actually been telling kids that have received tickets for lemonade stands, they have a legal team that will help fight the ticket. I love that.
Oh, my goodness.
Anyway, that's a great promotional campaign. Not here than there. What'd you learn?
One of the things that she said right at the start is magic is important, that it is important to create those magical moments in your child's life, but also in your own life. Like she had said that magic was important to all relationships, which I thought, I'm like, yes, that's great. So, but then, what I am taking is that whole, how to create magic every day in little ways. So the whole idea of stories are big in our family. We tell a lot of stories. And a lot of time, and they're oral stories. We read a lot as well, but there's also oral stories that were like it's sitting in the car and my daughter, and sometimes they are based on like my childhood where I'll tell a story about something, but other times I just totally make it up. And I've been carrying on this one story about the teeny tiny woman. There was this old story that I read as a kid, and I would say these stories to my brother when he was younger, and we would kind of share the story. And now I've kind of recreated it for my kids, and so every now and then, my kids will be in the back seat and they're like, "Mom, can you tell me about the teeny tiny woman?" Anyhow, and my husband does it as well. That he'll start. One of the things that he is doing, and have to give him props, because it was a couple of years ago where he started to tell a story, but he was too tired at night. And so he started the story and he told one of our daughters, can you tell me what happens next? And so she started to kind of contribute to the story, and then my other daughter contributed to the story. And at the time, I have to say, I was like, lazy bum. You can't even create the darn story for them. But now Dr. Breen is saying that that's actually what you have to do. And so that's something that I think I'm going to take away and really help them and really spur that a little bit more.
That's the other really important thing I had written down was that idea of co-creation. I do these road trips. I make sure that the kids are active participants. I'm not telling them where we're going. I'm saying, I remember we went to Chicago a couple of years ago, and day 3 we were all exhausted, right? So I asked them in the morning, what do you think we should do today? And they said we should just sit at home and in Chicago and watch movies. And I'm like, yeah, okay, let's go and do that. But that co-creation, there's a sense of empowerment that comes with that, not just over how we're making their lives magical, but as they get older, understanding that it's a collaborative environment, as opposed to, a dictatorship where it's like what I say and I'm going to control every part of the game. I love the fact that I remember those moments where you're like laying in the bed with the child and you're telling them the story and you're falling asleep.
Yes.
And I even remember to the point where you're like you're asleep and the kid's like, what did you just say? Because you're like half dreaming and kind of spitting that out. So the fact that getting them to kind of contribute is an ingenious. Your husband is ingenious for that. I got to tell you.
Yeah. I have to say, I gave him. I wasn't so kind to him before.
But what you can say to him is, there's no mistakes. There are only learning opportunities. And guess what I learned today?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great high note for us to wrap on. I can't thank. This has been probably my favorite episode. We've done a lot of great episodes, but I think we take away a lot. You can always tell by the kind of the energy in the studio. And this was really, really wonderful. We've got some other great episodes coming up. If you want to check out to see what we're doing, check out parentscanada.com. It's a brand new website for the magazine. There is an article on this about are we making our kids' childhood too magical, and there's a great story opening about Elf on the Shelf. Check in with that because there's all sorts of fantastic resources, and I really love the way that the new website is laid out. It makes it really easy to find if you're a parent of a toddler or a teenager, how you can be valuable to them. Meanwhile, come and find us. We are on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Parents Canada. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories. We want you to share your insights, and we'll be having some future episodes where we're going to be able to hear, I think, even a little bit more from you then. In the meantime, we're going to go and enjoy the rest of our Wednesday. I hope you go and do that on a beautiful July day. I am Jason Thompson.
And I'm Lisa Durante.
And you've been listening to Parents Canada Talk Radio on News Talk Sauga 960.